And I think part 2 is a bonus.
Oh, okay. I'm into
It's going to
that.
be a bonus episode.
Bonus it up.
Bonus. You're a winner. And you have received this prize of us talking for another hour about politics.
Congratulations. You made it. You made it to part 2. And your reward is listening to part 2.
Because this is a mental health program. A program.
I'm watching my program.
Laurel.
They talk so
Today
softly.
on the Conscious Mental Health Podcast, it's just so great to see you. We're going to talk about politics and therapy today.
Yeah.
Why'd I get my Southern voice?
I don't know, but I loved it.
I went real Southern.
Wow. I'm Laurel. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a mental health educator.
And I'm Juniper, also a licensed clinical social worker and mental health educator. And we are mental health educators together.
No, yeah, because I think it's important to talk about that. I just shared a tip that was like actively talking about bringing politics into the therapy space. Because I said, I'm working on having these plans with some of my clients when appropriate. Right. I do this. I don't do this with everybody.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit about that.
I want to talk all about that.
I know that it's very possible that when I shared that, there were some people who were like,
I love this about the mental health community and therapists, but it's so funny. Yes.
Therapy is political because no matter what you try to do, there is a world outside of your therapy room.
Therapy is political doesn't mean that I'm trying to convince you of a certain politic, right? That is not my role as a therapist.
If you're a therapist who strives to keep politics out of your work, I think you're going to have a really hard time doing that. In fact, I think it's going to be nearly impossible. Therapy is inherently political. There's just no escaping it.
Therapy is political.
It's so okay to ask your therapist where they stand on the political spectrum.
Is therapeutic neutrality a thing of the past? What even is therapeutic neutrality? And how do we contrast that with informed consent?
You're asking yourself why your therapist is getting political.
Here is why, at times, if appropriate, I will discuss my politics with a client. The number one reason is safety.
Politics is seen like one of those issues that we're just taught to just stay away from. Don't talk about it. Don't touch it.
Okay, you guys, there's a podcast. No, Laurel knows. There's a podcast called Bad Therapy or
Very Bad Therapy?
Very Bad Therapy. And they did have an episode on political stress, which we will link. And it was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
They opened it by talking about how they were so irritated and annoyed by a Facebook group that many of us belong to probably. Now, I'm not on Facebook. Laurel takes the L for the team by looking and being a part of some of these groups. So I just want to extend my gratitude for that.
It truly is an L some days.
It is.
Truly.
Taking
Jennifer,
one for the team.
Wow.
But it was therapists supporting therapists group.
Oh, no. I knew it was going to be that one.
And they were like, we can't name this.
One?
Yeah, they were like, we can't name this from anonymity. We will not name it, but oh, wow. And they were like, if you ever want to, it can be a great place of support. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is to see how different mental health professionals feel. That's why there is gray area. Yes, we have codes of ethics that are very specific to our licensure, for example. So of course there's going to be differences, but here's the biggest one I've been reading about with politics. It's the idea of therapists being neutral, being a blank slate. Mm-hmm. And then it all just cascades from there.
Yeah, I can hear the song. I can hear it in my mind.
Don't go chasing waterfalls. Please stick to the rivers and the lakes that you're used to.
We have the camp of the idea that therapists are neutral is such an outdated concept. Mm-hmm. And then you have the other camp, which are, no, that's not outdated. Right. That's protective. That is an important part of the process to be objective as possible, to not bring in your own stuff.
Yeah, I think it's the same. I think it's just so funny that you mentioned the Facebook group because, wow, y'all, it is like the Wild West out there sometimes. It's shocking. But also, it's interesting from a very zoomed out perspective. And I really try not to, I do read it, but I try not to engage. See, here's the thing. As much as we're talking about this, and I have that intellectualization part of me that's like, yes, I want to talk about these topics and this is so great. And like, let's lean into all of these conversations and all the, I'm a nosy bitch.
Right?
I need to know.
I know.
I want to know. So sometimes it's a true L, like I said, but also sometimes I get like pulled in and I'm like, wow, you really said that. Okay. Anyway. Not talking about anyone specific either, because I actually am really not. I don't know.
And it's our job. Like, as mental health educators, we also educate mental health professionals. So we need to know what is going on and what's being said in the community.
Yeah, that's why I have to be in all these groups.
That's why Laurel has to be in the groups, and you take the L. I do the TikTok.
You do the TikTok. You do the TikTok.
And I think in these surveys I was talking about in the Journal of Clinical Psychology, it said that, and this is now looking at therapists. Mm-hmm. So it said that 268 therapists and 604 patients conducted, I hate when people say patients. Well, I'm going to change it.
Okay.
268 therapists and 604 clients, and this was conducted after 2016 election. Mm-hmm. 2/3 of each group reported political discussions and self-disclosures in the therapy room. So that's about 2/3.
I guess it's not surprising, but it is interesting to me that's that significant.
Yeah,
of a percentage.
Mm-hmm. And it said that when political views were aligned, those disclosures were linked to a stronger therapeutic alliance, which makes sense based on some things we're going to talk about. And then it also showed the same study that almost 50% of clients were worried about the political climate and would have liked to speak about politics more in their sessions.
Right. So I think when we're having these discussions about like how politics shows up in the therapy space, it's important to recognize that because of all the reasons we're talking about, these are issues that people, whether they openly say it or not, are going to bring into the therapy space.
100%. When you said, like, I know some therapists might cringe when they heard me say, what's the plan? Well, I was cringing in a different way because, like you said, sometimes naming something as a safe to talk about, should the client want to, naming that this is a space that we can, because it's so polarized. Like maybe some people aren't sure if they can bring it up, or is this the right venue to talk about this? Or what if I offend my therapist?
Right.
So I am of the camp that it's okay.
I like the approach of just going ahead and bringing it up and pointing it out. I think that does go very much against the blank slate idea, but I don't buy into the blank slate.
You see, I think we probably are similar in that I do think it is an outdated concept.
I think it's very outdated.
But because what I think we're doing is we're actually not, it's not swaying someone. It's not saying we have to talk about this. Now that's an issue. If the therapist is coming in and saying, we have to talk about this election because it is so serious and it's the lot's on the line. Like that's maybe.
No, that's a little different.
Yeah. You're putting in your opinion, but like to say, is this something that we might need to talk about? Or is this something that is coming up for you? Are you thinking about it? Do you ever have any problems with seasons? This is always something I pregame.
Yeah.
Seasons and holidays.
Yeah,
right?
That's fair. Yeah.
Like that seems like not a problem at all. But then to say politics. But anyways, keep going.
Yeah, I agree. And I think although we are similar in that way, there are people who, for whatever reason, really still lean into that, right? That idea of like, I can't share anything about myself. I have heard and seen people actually frame that as like a negative experience in therapy of like, and it doesn't mean we have to share like our deepest, darkest secrets. Like that's not our job. And we talked about that in the coaching versus therapy episode, but like I've had people say like, well, I asked them a question and they just sort of like gave me this weird non-answer. And that was hurtful to me.
Let's talk about the classic response they train you to say.
Oh my God, I hate it.
So, hey, Laurel, are you married?
How would knowing that answer be helpful to you in this space?
Not exactly.
I was trained that way.
Same.
That to me now in like real world work, like in grad school, I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Like what a flip.
Yeah.
What a beautiful way to turn it around. No. Do you know what that sounds like to me? Totally patronizing.
Yeah.
Totally patronizing. Like, why do you need to know that?
Right.
That's so rude. If you don't feel like sharing something, there are lots of other ways that you could say that.
Yeah.
Like a whole lot.
A host of others.
Yeah. But I did think it was interesting because in an article that I read from the APA, they kind of advocated for or like recommended that to clinicians reading the article, a version of that when people asked about like political things or like used politically charged language.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's like a fine line, or like there's a lot of ethical things to consider when someone uses politically charged language, and there's a wide spectrum of that, right? But one of the things they recommended to say was like, how did you think I would react when you just said that term or like shared that term? Like, huh? What? I mean, I guess maybe in some context, but like, why is that the question we need to be asking when someone is talking about their political beliefs? I don't know. That was just weird to me.
Do you think they were like referencing if someone said something that was meant to maybe like, you know, be controversial or ruffle some feathers?
I mean, maybe. I think it was in reference to like really strong, like maybe offensive language.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting that was kind of like the recommendation rather than saying like, wow, you know, that term for a lot of people would be very offensive. Right. Instead of just kind of like calling it out.
Yeah.
And I guess it depends on your therapeutic style. But to me, that still sort of speaks about to like leaning into that, like, nothing you say affects me really. It's all about how you like about in it. And I just don't think that's very human.
Well, no, number one, you walk into an office and you are showing yourself.
Yeah,
you are,
of course you are
offering a political stance. Some people, now I don't personally do this, but again, we all have our different styles.
Mm-hmm.
I never had pictures of my family members or anything like that in the office. That was a personal choice.
Right.
Some people do.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that when you walk into our offices, you might see something like a pride flag, or you might see something like a ceasefire call.
Mm-hmm.
We are inherently offering politics.
Right.
And it could be even little things. You have a mushroom plant, or it could be something like a sticker.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's just, again, we can preach this, but even just having like a crystal lamp, that says something about
it
you.
It does.
Have you been noticing anything around the election season or whatever? Do you have a plan? That's different than saying, like, that to me is not asking, or it's not sharing anything about yourself.
Right. No, I agree. I think it's
to
just
me,
like
that's
offering it up as an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like, you're not saying, wow, I've been really stressed out about this election season, so you probably are too. It's very different.
Yeah, or the self-awareness piece of if you're someone who feels really uncomfortable talking about certain topics or hasn't like addressed or processed your own emotional experiences and reactions around things, then that's, in my view, when it can become a problem with the client. So in that episode that I was talking about, the really bad therapy, there was a client talking about how their therapist was getting very emotional, talking about political concepts, and that was making the client feel uncomfortable. Like almost it was becoming like a debate.
Yeah.
And when we're thinking of those lines, that's far beyond neutral blank slate.
Yes.
If you don't bring up something like that, it's because in some ways maybe you're uncomfortable around it, or you don't want to deal with it, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So in some of the advice that I was reading about was knowing your political stances.
Yeah.
Knowing your hot button topics. Knowing what are your values and views around politics, and how could that be affected if someone had something different, or you know, the list goes on and on and on. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the self-awareness piece is the key, and to know your political stances, or at least as much as possible. Because as I'm, as I'm working in a clinical setting, I think it is about understanding the relationship that you have with your client has with you, and then also the relationship you have to the issue at hand. Because if somebody is bringing up, oh, this political thing is like really bothering me and I'm so stressed by it, and it's something that maybe I align with, then it might be helpful, kind of like that article we referenced earlier, to the therapeutic relationship to like offer real validation around that. Like, wow, yeah, that's really hard. Maybe it's hard for me too sometimes. I think that's appropriate and okay, as long as you're not like, it's hard for me because of all of these things. Yeah, it's hard for you. It's a hard thing for me. You're not alone in that. But if it's somebody offering up something that I like really disagree with, then I might not engage in that as much. I might hear them out and let them talk through it and ask them how they feel about it. But that's a very different relationship to the issue and to the client in that moment. And it is not about how I feel about it. It's about how they feel about it.
Yeah.
And offering what I can based on my experience and how they feel about it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's
self-awareness. Totally key.
Exactly. I was thinking of an incident where I had a client who felt very differently than me about a very emotionally charged topic, vaccines. And thinking it was so interesting, the therapeutic session versus a conversation I had with a very good friend about the same topic.
Yeah.
And this was actually not COVID vaccines. This was vaccinating their children, which is a very emotionally charged topic. And I just remember having the conversation with my friend where I don't have to be on guard, right?
Yeah.
Like I can just be like, but I just noticed it coming up in both of us.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy crap, like this is so intense. Like I'm so irritated by what you're saying right now. And but we were just like, holy crap, that went fast. Then I was thinking about it with my session. I felt the same thing coming up when my client was talking about this. But what was different was I was working.
Right.
It was my job.
Different.
So I said, oh, this is coming up and this will come into the session because I'm feeling it, like my face getting red and things like that. So I took some breaths like we do.
Right.
And I let the client talk and then they asked me my opinion. Laurel, this is a feared situation of all therapists. Remember how we just talked about before?
I know.
And then of course my training came back and I was like, should I say the thing of like, how would that help you to know my stance on this?
Yeah.
So I was really proud of myself. I have trained myself because actually we don't get trained in this. We have to train ourselves. Actually,
we're given one thing to say to every question, which was that.
Exactly. And did you know that they don't talk about this in grad school? So anyhow, I went with this approach. There's a lot of different views on this topic and there's a lot of research on this topic. And I don't feel comfortable sharing my view on this topic because it's not relevant. And that's just what I said. And the way I framed it, and I had a good rapport with this client, was that it doesn't matter because I'm not the one making this choice. You're making the choice to vaccinate your child or not me.
Right.
So whether I agree or not, it doesn't really matter because you have to make the choice.
Right.
And so we kind of framed it in that way and they appreciated it. Think about that approach.
I like that better.
Yeah.
I think it's better to just be honest in an appropriate and ethical way, like about whether or not you want to share that than trying to like skirt around it and be like, I don't really want to share this with you, but I'm going to try to like put it back on you so I don't have to tell you I don't want to share it with you.
Right.
So instead of being like, how would that help you to know?
Yeah.
Saying like, that's just not something I share with people.
Yeah.
Or that's just not something I think would be helpful to talk about right now.
Right. I'd be happy to share with you resources if you'd like to get information on both sides, or I'd be happy to process this difficult choice for you. And I think it's okay to tell people you don't feel comfortable sharing certain things. Other things I'd feel totally comfortable sharing.
Right.
But in that instance, the reason why I didn't is because of my emotional reaction.
That makes sense.
And I could felt it.
Right.
And I knew that if I did share it, it would come out.
My guess is this isn't the only reason that, like, theoretically, like, people lean so hard into the blank slate. But I do think that's sort of like a general gatekeeper.
Right.
Or gatekeeping device, right? For folks that, for whatever reason, may not be able to have that wherewithal in the moment and that self-awareness in the moment, and who might take it too far. Kind of like that therapist from the Bad Therapy episode who, like, might really, like, be very emotional and unable to manage that. So I guess if you truly can't have those conversations without making it about yourself, then you do have to be a blank slate.
There we go.
But I don't think that means that no therapist ever could bring politics into the therapy space. And I don't think it's unethical to do that.
No. And there's some theoretical foundations that are inherently political. For example, social constructionist theory or feminist therapy. Right. There are some that is the modality of the therapy is to bring that in.
Absolutely.
This is what's very difficult about this profession and being a client of this profession, because it's interesting. I actually prefer less self-disclosure with my therapist.
Whereas you don't want your therapist to self-disclose.
I'm not as into it as other people are.
Yeah.
Well, there's lots of reasons for that. But yet I've had a lot of clients that feel very connected with therapeutic and intentional self-disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
So I just know that it's so unique to each person and therapist. But I think that when we are doing things without our awareness, in my view, they're all clinical choices.
Yeah, of course.
And not even clinical choices, they're professional.
Yeah.
And same thing with clients. It's not their job in that moment to be in charge of your decision-making system.
God, no. I found this therapist on TikTok that I thought had some like really interesting things to say about it. So I'm going to play it.
What is the role of therapy, like in the end times of capitalism? How do you counsel people through the indignities of white supremacy? Like, certainly don't have a good answer for that. I don't know if anyone has a perfect answer for that. But one thing I do know for sure is that like this whole ethos we've had in therapy for so long about therapists being apolitical absolutely is just non-existent anymore. It just can't be, because therapy is inherently political. Whether or not I choose to charge sliding scale, whether or not I choose to accept insurance, whatever my rates are going to be based on how I can afford to live and how other people can afford to have access to therapy, whether or not I'm going to create disability accessibility, language accessibility, like all of these things are political choices and how I choose to offer up therapy. Am I going to acknowledge like you have really deep-seated trauma and issues related to racism and living in a white supremacy state, or am I going to ignore that? Am I going to talk about the fact like you're living under a certain kind of paradigm as a queer person that feels very traumatizing, or am I going to choose to ignore that? All of these are political things. Like how I choose to deliver therapy is political.
So the reason I wanted to incorporate this and this therapist's thought, what I hear her saying is it's not just about whether we talk about politics in the therapy space. Like it's going to be there whether we talk about it or not. I do believe that. Yeah. I do believe therapy is inherently political, especially at this point in time. I don't think there's any way for it to not be political. It's our lives and it's our clients' lives. And it's, to her point, like it's the choices we make about our rates and if we can pay our bills, and it goes beyond whether or not we say it out loud. It's just going to be there. And so our choice is, I think, to acknowledge it or not acknowledge it. And I think to not acknowledge it at all is doing harm.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what we've been talking about. There is a writer, Dr. Travis Heath. He's a narrative therapist, and he talks a lot about viewing therapy as a political act. He emphasizes that neutrality is itself a political stance. So,
of course it is.
Yeah. He believes that by pretending to be neutral, therapists often sideline issues of race, class, and power, missing an opportunity to help clients understand the broader political systems that contribute to their mental health. Not only just contribute, that in some instances, I'm going to be extreme and say dictate.
Oh, absolutely. I would agree with that.
Okay. And there is also a institute called the Critical Therapy Institute. Did you see that coming up in your research?
That's cool. I would love to look at it.
It argues that by avoiding political discussions, therapists can unconsciously perpetuate neoliberal ideologies and fail to address how systemic issues like poverty, racism, or gender inequity impact mental health.
Absolutely.
So they do a training called critical therapy. That's why they're Critical Therapy Institute. And they also said that it's that critique of adopting a blank slate because it supports the status quo.
Right.
And I'm really proud that our main values in the way that we do all of our therapy trainings are within those broader social context. I feel very proud of that.
Me too. I don't think I could do it if it didn't include that, because it's just something that, to me, just totally inescapable. Yeah. And I'm not in this job to maintain the status quo, right?
Yeah, that reminds me of a really cool slogan/design that one of my favorite therapists and coworkers created. And it was therapist, just a healing tool under capitalist rule. And I was like, yes.
Oh, me. I made that one. I did. I do like that one.
And that really goes to the point of understanding. See, and then we're getting really deep here. What is health? What is mental health? What is therapy? What are our jobs? And a lot of people say that if we do not start to evolve and adopt these stances, that our job is to maintain status quo and quote unquote help people be okay in a system that's not okay for them.
Yeah.
Inherently. I mean, there's a lot of other things involved with that. I think it's either we move on and we address what's really happening around us, or we stay in some kind of like Western hyper individualistic view that we can just somehow psychoanalyze ourselves to healing, whatever that means.
Right.
A lot of what I saw in the reading, that political neutrality or not paying attention is in itself a privilege.
Yeah.
And I'm curious of your thoughts around that, especially as a therapist, because I have talked to a lot of colleagues who say that they just don't want to engage, that they find that it's so quote unquote toxic, and there's no really good choices, and a two-party system is so binary, and they don't feel like it's a place for them, so they just aren't going to engage at all. And and I'm wondering what you think. I've seen actually two different parts about that being a privilege or not being a privilege. For me, how could it not be a privilege?
It's a privilege.
Okay.
I think it's a privilege. If I choose not to engage, what I'm essentially saying, unless there's a specific situation, which we referenced earlier, right? Like in some capacities, choosing not to engage in specific things might be a necessity for your own well-being. Okay? But that is a very different situation than just being like, it's just a two-party system. There's no good answer, so I can't do anything about it. Like, so I'm not going to do anything. Not even going to look at it. I'm just turning away. What does that say to the people in your life who are really going to experience the actual physical consequences and consequences in time, like the literal consequences, not the abstract ideas, not the thought experiments that you wrote a paper on in your medical ethics class in your undergrad or whatever. You don't care about that. Or you're at least not acknowledging that it's real, or like look that person in the face and say, I know this is going to directly affect you. I'm just not going to do anything about it anyway, because it's too much for me. Personally, I think that's a cop-out. Personally, I think like if you are just generally choosing to check out because you feel like there's no good answer right now in this very exact moment, then it's a privilege to not care about those things.
Yeah, it's a privilege. And
100%.
And when you have a privilege, that means you have a choice.
Yeah.
And I also think that as a professional, that choice or privilege that you can have personally changes.
Yeah.
In my view.
Sure.
So while you might have the privilege to be like, I'm not going to talk about this today, or there's a lot of spiritual bypassing that happens because it helps people to stay safe, so they feel like bad things will never happen to them. But that being said, once you're a professional in a profession that is mental health, and to me, I'm a social worker, that's my background, it doesn't really matter what I'm doing personally in that moment, because it's going to come into my work. I would really highly recommend, if this is something that's coming up that's difficult for you, peer consultation. We offer that. There's lots of groups that have it, going to consultation groups.
Yeah.
Because we need support.
Absolutely.
This isn't easy work.
Yeah.
Just as it's not easy to exist, and all the things that we've been talking about, we're humans and we're experiencing it too.
Course. Yeah.
And we have a job. It's a weird job.
It's a weird job.
For example, in the social work code of ethics, and this is the last thing I wanted to bring up about the role of politics in therapy, is with social work, but I feel like you're an honorary social worker.
I'm a social worker in my heart.
But if I had another chance, I'd do it all again. It's in my heart.
Yeah, we have an ethical mandate of advocacy. So say there's something that's directly affecting our client population that is systemic, we also can advocate or legislate or do something on a macro level. We're like supposed to. It's part of our process. And so I think that by adopting that neutral stance, even if it's your personal stance, but as a profession, I do think that that is irresponsible.
Yeah.
Is that the word to say, or unethical?
I'm going to look up the American Counseling Association because that would be.
That's what we use. We use the NASW, National Association of Social Work's Code of Ethics. And that's what all social workers use. Then you have to go by your state guidelines and you have to go by your agency guidelines.
When appropriate, counselors advocate at individual, group, institutional, and societal levels to address potential barriers and obstacles that inhibit access and or the growth and development of clients. That's our statement.
Was that ever reinforced to you in your training?
Probably not in the same way that it was in social work.
I think the way that therapy comes up in session is deeply influenced by our theoretical background, our education, licensure type, ethics, the agencies in which we work. Some might prohibit certain types of therapy or actions. Like some people don't want you doing advocacy while you're working for certain organizations. So I do think that it's very nuanced. Definitely talk to supervisors, colleagues, and let's bring it back to the personal.
Yep.
Let's end it with the personal. Because I think those are really good conversations to have. I think we kind of settled into the idea that therapy is inherently political. We are not neutral robots. And we also don't need to bring in our stuff.
That's right. I think that's the formula.
Can we just say?
We have a formula, but that's as close as we're going to get.
That's the formula.
So it doesn't mean we have to be scared of it. I think a lot of folks are scared to approach that because of all the things we've already talked about. But I don't think we have to be afraid of it. I think we just have to understand the purpose and be self-aware.
Yep. I would love to hear one piece from yours, and I'm going to share a piece from mine that I might be making up on the fly about our plan.
Oh, my plan.
Yeah. Your personal plan to also, though, your plan to win whatever ends up happening, the fallout from that with your clients.
Well, I have actually had some conversations where we have scheduled purposeful sessions that week later in the week because they felt that that was going to be helpful for them. I didn't make them or anything, but that was part of the plan, right? Like, okay, we're going to have therapy that week just in case we need it.
Right.
You know? And I might do the same thing for myself.
I was going to say, maybe you scheduled.
I haven't scheduled my November. Maybe I have. I don't know. I think I actually did. So I have therapy for myself. I've offered that as an option for clients who would find that helpful. And I also really, I think I am going to want to like hyper focus and like doom scroll all day. And so that's why I said I'm working on purpose. Like I'm going to have to like compartmentalize a lot. Yeah. So yeah, that's as far as I've gotten.
Okay. That's
How
a
about
plan.
you?
That is a plan. Well, as you had mentioned that, I hadn't really thought about it, but there's a few things that I think that I'm going to implement personally. And one of them is, like you said, I'm going to want to watch. And it's a one time every 4 years.
I mean, I'm going to watch. Don't get me wrong.
Pay attention.
Yeah.
And like, I think I am going to make a game.
Okay.
Maybe not
I wanna play.
maybe bingo, but maybe a different game. Like, I don't even know what's going to come up yet, but like some kind of way to,
Juniper makes really good political debate bingos.
Oh, political
I
debate
use them every
bingos.
time.
And like I decorate the hell out of them. The last one was
really
very
good.
visual.
Oh yes, I loved it. Yeah. So graphic.
But there's like a lot
not
of
graphic like violent, like graphic like lots of pictures.
Yeah, I wanted to make it pretty. Like, so for me, aesthetics are important. So yeah, I'm going to make something to do. So I'm not just like,
oh, that's so smart.
Like a game or something that I can focus on and do while I'm paying attention. Yeah, that really helps me. And then I also think that, I don't know, I think I want to have a few groups set up for therapists. For ours and our group practice.
I think that would be a really good idea.
I think just having it out there, ready to go if needed, because like, just like we tell our clients to have support, and like, I think we might need it because I don't want,
say it.
Yeah. I don't want to imagine worst case possible scenarios, but this happens globally in politics and elections. Sometimes violence happens, sometimes all kinds of things. So I think just being prepared to support each other and then while we're supporting others.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to do that.
I love that.
Maybe get a couple dates together and
I'm into it.
Offer some support for colleagues.
Okay.
I'm really curious of our listeners, like what their thoughts are, and what I would love to hear any examples of how this has gone like really right or really wrong for them in therapy, right? Like what are instances of this being done well?
Call in and tell us. Has it gone really well for you, like as a client, or have you felt like it's really helpful as a clinician, or have you had a really difficult or harmful experience with some of these things? It's helpful to hear story.
Yeah.
So if you have one, we would love to hear it. Also, if you enjoyed listening to us unpack all of this, make sure you like hit the like button and that subscribe button.
Please.
All the things so that you can be well aware the next time one of these pops up for you.
We have broken our system.
Oh my gosh, what's wrong with that?
It's broken.
Is it only when we talk?
Oh God. I think it's re-recording.
Oh no.
It's so long.
Uh-oh.
Bye, folks.
Okay, bye. Love you, bye.
Peace.
It probably is.
Why is it still recording? Oh my God.
What? What happened? What happened?
Me.
Oh.